The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Maya Chen adjusted her stance for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The Glock 19 felt foreign in her grip despite 12 weeks of handling it daily, its weight somehow both too heavy and too light simultaneously. Around her, the other police academy cadets moved with the fluid confidence she desperately envied, their movements crisp and purposeful as they prepared for the final firearms qualification that would determine their futures. Chen, Instructor Rodriguez's voice cracked like a whip across the indoor range. "You're up. This is it, pass or fail time." Maya's throat constricted as she stepped up to lane 7, the same lane where she'd embarrassed herself countless times before. The paper target hung 50 feet away, its black silhouette seeming to mock her with its simple, achievable demands. All she needed was a score of 210 out of 300 possible points. Her classmates had been hitting 280s and 290s for weeks. Even Tommy Kowalski, who'd never held a gun before the academy, had scored a 267 yesterday. She could feel the weight of 23 pairs of eyes boring into her back. The other cadets had finished their qualifications over the past 2 days, most passing with flying colors. Maya was the last one standing, or rather, the last one failing. Rodriguez had made it clear that this was her final chance, a courtesy he was extending only because her father had been killed in the line of duty 3 years ago. "Load and make ready," Rodriguez commanded, his clipboard already positioned to record what everyone expected would be another disaster. Maya's hands trembled as she inserted the magazine, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. She'd practiced this motion thousands of times, but now her fingers felt thick and clumsy, like she was wearing invisible gloves. The familiar routine of chambering around, checking her grip, and aligning her sights felt mechanical and disconnected. "You have 2 minutes for 25 rounds," Rodriguez announced. "Begin firing when ready." The first shot exploded from her barrel with a violence that made her flinch. Even before the smoke cleared, she knew it was wide. The second shot felt better, more controlled, but when she squinted downrange, she couldn't see any new holes in her target. Panic began to creep up her spine like ice water. Behind her, she heard Jessica Martinez whisper to her partner, "This is painful to watch." Maya tried to block out the commentary, focusing on her breathing the way Rodriguez had taught them. In through the nose, hold, squeeze the trigger on the exhale. But her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples, and her vision seemed to tunnel until all she could see was the wavering front sight of her pistol. Shot after shot rang out, each one feeling worse than the last. The target seemed to be moving, dancing just out of reach of her bullets. She could hear Rodriguez muttering under his breath, the scratch of his pen marking her failures on the scorecard. By the time she'd fired 15 rounds, sweat was dripping into her eyes despite the air conditioning. 30 seconds remaining, Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying a note of finality that made Maya's stomach lurch. She rushed the final 10 shots, pulling the trigger as fast as she could acquire what she hoped was a sight picture. The gun bucked in her hands, the muzzle flash temporarily blinding her in the dim range. When the last brass casing clinked to the concrete floor, the silence that followed felt like a death knell. Rodriguez pressed the button to bring her target forward, the mechanical whirring filling the space where encouragement should have been. As the paper drew closer, Maya's heart sank into her boots. The target looked like it had been attacked by a shotgun blast, holes scattered across the white paper in a pattern that suggested she'd been aiming at everything except the scoring zones. "Jesus Christ, Chen," Rodriguez said, not bothering to lower his voice as he tallied her score. 47 points, out of 300. He looked up from his clipboard, his expression a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "I've seen storm troopers with better accuracy." A few of the cadets snickered at the Star Wars reference, but most just stared in uncomfortable silence. Maya felt heat creeping up her neck, her face burning with shame as Rodriguez continued his assessment. In 12 weeks, you've shown zero improvement. Zero. I've had recruits who were legally blind shoot better scores than this. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the range. Your father was a good cop, Chen. A damn good cop. But whatever he had, it didn't get passed down to you. The words hit Maya like physical blows. She thought of her father's service weapon, locked away in her mother's bedroom closet, and wondered if he was watching from somewhere, ashamed of what his daughter had become. The other cadets began to shuffle their feet and pack up their gear, the awkwardness of the moment making everyone eager to escape. "Pack it up," Rodriguez said, turning away from her as if she'd already ceased to exist. "Report to Captain Morrison's office at 800 tomorrow. You're done here." Maya's hands shook as she cleared her weapon and holstered it for what she knew would be the last time. The routine that had become second nature over the past 3 months now felt like a funeral rite. She gathered her spent brass casings, a habit drilled into them from day one, and dumped them into the recycling bucket with hands that felt disconnected from her body. As she walked toward the exit, she caught fragments of whispered conversations that cut deeper than Rodriguez's public humiliation. How did she even make it through the physical training? "I've heard they only kept her because of her dad. Probably better this way. Can you imagine her as backup?" Tommy Kowalski, who'd been friendly enough during their academic classes, couldn't meet her eyes as she passed. Jessica Martinez, who'd shared study notes and coffee during their late-night cram sessions, suddenly found something fascinating about her shoelaces. Even Marcus Thompson, who'd struggled with the legal studies portion and had come to Maya for help, turned away as she approached. The locker room felt like a tomb as Maya gathered her personal belongings. Her academy uniform, which she'd worn with such pride on the first day, now felt like a costume she had no right to wear. She folded it carefully, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had failed, and placed it in her gym bag along with her notebooks, study guides, and the small framed photo of her father in his dress blues that had sat on her bunk. The drive home through the city streets felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life through a window. She passed the police station where her father had worked, its familiar brick facade now seeming to judge her as harshly as Rodriguez had. The flag flew at full staff. No heroes had fallen today, just dreams dying quietly in a fluorescent-lit shooting range. Her mother was waiting in the kitchen when Maya walked through the front door, still wearing her hospital scrubs from the night shift. Linda Chen had always been able to read her daughter's face like a book, and the expression she saw now told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother said, rising from the kitchen table where she'd been pretending to read the newspaper. Maya collapsed into her mother's arms, finally allowing the tears she'd held back at the academy to flow freely. "I failed, Mom. I failed everything. I can't even hold a gun properly, let alone use one to protect people." Linda held her daughter tightly, stroking her hair the way she had when Maya was small and had scraped her knee or lost a soccer game. But this wasn't a scraped knee that would heal with time and a Band-Aid. This was the death of a dream that had sustained Maya through 3 years of grief and uncertainty. "Your father would be proud of you for trying," Linda whispered, but even she seemed to struggle with the conviction behind the words. "No, he wouldn't," Maya said, pulling back to look at her mother through tear-blurred eyes. "He was the best shot in his precinct. He could put 6 rounds through the same hole at 50 yards, and I can't even hit a target the size of a dinner plate." That night, Maya lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city beyond her window. Sirens wailed in the distance, other people's emergencies being handled by officers who had earned the right to wear the badge. She thought about her father's stories of the academy, how he'd graduated second in his class, how proud he'd been to serve and protect. She thought about Rodriguez's words, replaying them like a broken record. Maybe try mall security instead. The suggestion felt like a slap, not because mall security wasn't honest work, but because it represented everything she wasn't good enough to achieve. If she couldn't protect citizens as a police officer, what made her think she could protect shoppers in a mall? The worst part wasn't the failure itself. It was the certainty that everyone had been right to doubt her from the beginning. She'd seen the looks when she'd first announced her intention to join the academy. The polite smiles that didn't reach people's eyes, the careful encouragement that felt more like pity. They'd all known what she was too stubborn to admit. She wasn't cut out for this life. As the clock struck midnight, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. Tomorrow, she would clean out her locker and officially withdraw from the academy. She would thank Captain Morrison for the opportunity and apologize for wasting everyone's time. She would find a different path, one that didn't require skills she clearly didn't possess. But tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for the future that would never be, for the father who would never see her follow in his footsteps, and for the version of herself that had believed she could be something more than she was. The last thing she saw before sleep finally claimed her was the shadow of her father's police hat on her dresser, a reminder of everything she'd failed to become. Maya woke at 3:47 a.m. with her father's voice echoing in her mind, not the disappointed whisper she'd imagined the night before, but something else entirely. A memory from when she was 8 years old, sitting in their backyard while he cleaned his service weapon after a long shift. "The gun doesn't make the officer, Maya Bear," he'd said, using the nickname that always made her giggle. "The officer makes the gun work. It's all about finding your center, your truth. Some people see it with their eyes, some feel it in their bones." She'd asked him what he meant, but he just smiled and ruffled her hair, promising to explain when she was older. Now, lying in the darkness of her childhood bedroom with the taste of failure still bitter in her mouth, those words felt like a message from beyond the grave. Maya slipped out of bed and dressed quietly, pulling on dark jeans and a black hoodie. Her mother's soft snoring drifted from down the hall as she crept through the house, grabbing her father's old tactical flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The academy keys were still in her jacket pocket. She was supposed to return them tomorrow along with her resignation, but tonight they felt like a lifeline. The drive back to the academy took 20 minutes through empty streets. The building loomed against the night sky like a fortress, its windows dark except for the security lights that cast long shadows across the parking lot. Maya parked behind the maintenance shed where her car wouldn't be visible from the street, her heart hammering as she approached the side entrance she discovered during a late-night study session weeks ago. The door's lock mechanism had been broken for months, a fact the maintenance staff seemed blissfully unaware of. Maya slipped inside, the familiar smell of gun oil and industrial cleaner filling her nostrils. The hallways felt different in the darkness, more intimate somehow, as if the building was sharing secrets it kept hidden during the day. The shooting range was tomb quiet as she entered, emergency lighting casting everything in an eerie red glow. Maya made her way to the equipment locker, her hand surprisingly steady as she retrieved a Glock 19 and a box of ammunition. The weight of the weapon felt different now, not foreign and unwieldy, but somehow more honest in the darkness. She loaded the magazine with practiced efficiency, the mechanical clicks echoing in the empty space. At lane 7, the same lane where she'd humiliated herself hours earlier, she set up a fresh target and sent it down range to the 50-foot mark. The paper silhouette hung there like a ghost, waiting for her to fail it once again. Maya raised the pistol, settling into the stance Rodriguez had drilled into them countless times. Isosceles position, feet shoulder-width apart, dominant hand high on the grip, support hand wrapped around, thumbs forward. She aligned the sights, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash illuminated the range for a split second, and Maya immediately knew the shot was wide. She could feel it in the way the gun had moved, the slight jerk that indicated she'd pulled rather than squeezed. Frustration bubbled up in her chest, the same helpless anger that had plagued her for months. But then something strange happened. As she stood there in the red-tinged darkness, Maya found herself closing her eyes, not in defeat but in curiosity. With her vision eliminated, her other senses seemed to sharpen dramatically. She could hear the subtle hum of the ventilation system, feel the slight vibration of the building's structure through her feet, sense the exact distance to the target in a way that had nothing to do with sight. She raised the pistol again, eyes still closed, and something clicked into place. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and for the first time in months, the weapon felt like an extension of her body rather than a foreign object she was trying to control. The trigger broke cleanly, and even before the echo faded, Maya knew this shot was different. When she opened her eyes and activated her father's flashlight, she gasped. The bullet hole was dead center in the target's chest, a perfect circle punched through the black silhouette. Her hands began to shake, not with nerves this time, but with something that felt like electricity. "Impossible," she whispered to the empty range, but even as she said it, she was loading another round. This time she kept her eyes closed from the beginning, settling into a meditative state she'd never experienced before. The world narrowed to just her breathing, her heartbeat, and the weight of the weapon in her hands. The second shot felt even better than the first, the recoil flowing through her body like water. When she checked the target, the new hole was less than an inch from the first. Maya's breath caught in her throat as memories flooded back, not just of her father's words, but of her grandmother. Nai had been blind for the last 15 years of her life, a victim of diabetes that had slowly stolen her sight. But Maya remembered how her grandmother had moved through their house with supernatural grace, never bumping into furniture, always knowing exactly where everything was. She'd cooked elaborate meals without ever looking at the stove, navigated crowded markets by sound and smell alone, and once famously caught a falling vase that Maya had knocked over before anyone else had even realized it was falling. "Some people see with their eyes," Nai had told her once. "Others see with their spirit. The spirit never lies." Maya pulled off her hoodie and tied it around her eyes, creating a makeshift blindfold that blocked out even the emergency lighting. In the complete darkness, something extraordinary happened. The range didn't disappear, it transformed. She could sense the walls, feel the target's location as clearly as if it were glowing, understand the space around her in 3 dimensions without needing to see it. She loaded 6 rounds into the magazine and took her stance. The first shot felt perfect, the trigger breaking like glass. The second followed immediately, then the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in rapid succession. Each shot felt more natural than the last, as if she were finally using muscles she'd been born with but had never known existed. When she removed the blindfold and illuminated the target, Maya's knees nearly buckled. 6 holes clustered in a group no larger than a silver dollar, all within the highest scoring zone. It was better than anything she'd ever seen Rodriguez shoot, better than the Academy instructor's demonstration targets that hung in the hallway as examples of excellence. "What the hell?" she breathed, but she was already reloading, already hungry for more. For the next 2 hours, Maya explored this newfound ability with the methodical precision of a scientist. She tried different distances, 25 feet, 50 feet, even 75 feet. She attempted different positions, standing, kneeling, prone. She experimented with different targets, different lighting conditions, different breathing patterns. The results were consistent and impossible to deny. Blindfolded, Maya Chen was a marksman of extraordinary ability. With her eyes open, she couldn't hit the broad side of a barn. With them closed, she could thread a needle at 50 paces. As dawn began to creep through the high windows of the range, Maya sat on the concrete floor surrounded by spent brass casings and shredded targets, trying to process what she'd discovered. Every principle of marksmanship she'd been taught emphasized sight alignment, sight picture, visual focus on the front sight. But for her, vision was apparently the enemy. She thought about her father again, about the way he'd sometimes closed his eyes when he was thinking deeply about a case, the way he'd navigate their house in the dark during his midnight shifts without ever turning on a light. Had he known something about this? Had he seen something in her that she'd never recognized in herself? Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Breakfast is ready when you are, sweetheart. We'll figure this out together." The message brought tears to her eyes, but they weren't tears of defeat anymore. They were tears of possibility, of hope, of a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. She carefully cleaned the weapon and returned it to the equipment locker, policed her brass, and disposed of the shredded targets. The range looked exactly as she'd found it, but Maya Chen was fundamentally changed. As she drove home through the awakening city, Maya's mind raced with possibilities. She thought about Rodriguez's cruel dismissal, about the whispered comments from her classmates, about the certainty in everyone's eyes that she didn't belong. They'd all been wrong, but not in the way they thought. She didn't belong in their world of conventional marksmanship and traditional training methods. She belonged in a world they couldn't even imagine. The sun was fully up by the time she pulled into her driveway, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded her of hope. Her mother was waiting at the kitchen window, worry etched across her features, but Maya walked through the front door with a confidence that had been missing for months. "Mom," she said, setting her keys on the counter with steady hands, "I need to tell you something incredible." Linda Chen looked at her daughter's face, really looked at it, and saw something there that made her catch her breath. It was the same expression Maya's father had worn when he'd solved a particularly difficult case, the same quiet certainty that had made him such an effective officer. "What happened, sweetheart?" Maya smiled, and for the first time since her father's death it reached her eyes. "I found my center." Maya arrived at the academy at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before her scheduled meeting with Captain Morrison to officially withdraw from the program. But instead of heading to the administrative offices, she made a detour to Rodriguez's classroom where she knew he'd be preparing for the day's lessons. Her heart was steady now, her purpose clear, and the small digital camera in her pocket contained proof that would change everything. Rodriguez looked up from his lesson plans with barely concealed irritation when Maya knocked on his open door. "Chen, you're early. Morrison's office is down the hall. I'm sure you remember the way." "I need to speak with you first," Maya said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "About my test yesterday." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, a condescending smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What's to discuss? You failed. Spectacularly. Some people just aren't cut out for this work, and the sooner you accept that, the better off everyone will be." Maya pulled out her phone and set it on his desk, the screen displaying a photograph that made Rodriguez's expression shift from smugness to confusion. The image showed a target with 6 bullet holes clustered in a perfect circle at the center, each shot within the highest scoring zone. "Photoshop," Rodriguez said immediately, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nice try, Chen, but digital manipulation isn't going to change your scores." "It's not Photoshop," Maya replied calmly. "I took this at 5:47 this morning in range 3. I can show you the metadata, the timestamp, even the security footage if you'd like." Rodriguez studied the image more carefully, his brow furrowing. The grouping was impossibly tight, better than anything he'd seen from academy instructors, better than his own personal best. Even if this is real, which I doubt, one lucky string doesn't erase 12 weeks of failure. Maya swiped to the next photo, then the next, then the next, target after target, each showing the same impossible accuracy. Different distances, different positions, all with the same devastating precision. Rodriguez's face grew pale as he scrolled through dozens of images. "How?" he whispered, then caught himself and straightened. "I don't care what tricks you're trying to pull, Chen. Your official scores are what matter, and those scores say you're not qualified to carry a badge." "Then let me retest," Maya said simply. "Right now, in front of witnesses." Rodriguez laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think I'm going to waste everyone's time with some elaborate stunt? You had your chance and you blew it." Are you afraid I might actually pass? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya could see Rodriguez's jaw clench. His reputation as the Academy's toughest instructor was built on his ability to separate the wheat from the chaff, to identify those who had what it took and those who didn't. If Maya somehow managed to pass a retest, it would call his judgment into question. "Fine," he said finally, standing abruptly. "You want to humiliate yourself one more time. Be my guest. But when you fail again, I don't want to hear another word about second chances or special circumstances." Word spread through the academy like wildfire. By the time Maya and Rodriguez reached the shooting range, a crowd had gathered. Captain Morrison was there, along with several other instructors and most of Maya's former classmates. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and skepticism. "This is highly irregular," Captain Morrison said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Chen, are you sure you want to do this? Your withdrawal meeting is in 20 minutes. You could walk away right now with your dignity intact." Maya looked around at the assembled faces, some curious, some pitying, most expecting to witness another spectacular failure. She spotted Jessica Martinez near the back, whispering to Tommy Kowalski. Marcus Thompson stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe she was putting herself through this again. "I'm sure, sir," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the range. "But I have one condition." Rodriguez snorted. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, Chen." "I want to shoot blindfolded." The range erupted in murmurs and scattered laughter. Someone in the back called out, "This is getting ridiculous." Captain Morrison raised his hand for silence, his expression grave. "Chen, I understand you're under a lot of stress, but this isn't a circus. We're training police officers here, not performing magic tricks. With respect, sir, marksmanship is about hitting your target consistently and accurately. The method shouldn't matter as long as the results speak for themselves." Maya pulled a black bandana from her pocket. She'd stopped at a sporting goods store on the way to the academy. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the same test everyone else took, just with my eyes covered." Rodriguez stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is insane. You can't even shoot with your eyes open, and now you want to try it blind. I won't be party to this charade." "Then you're admitting you're afraid of the results," Maya said quietly, but her words carried to every corner of the range. The challenge was unmistakable, and Rodriguez's reputation hung in the balance. He'd built his career on being the instructor who could spot a failure from a mile away, who never let unqualified candidates slip through the cracks. If he backed down now, it would undermine everything he'd worked to establish. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But we do this by the book. Standard qualification course, 25 rounds, 2 minutes. When you fail, and you will fail, I want everyone here to witness it." Captain Morrison looked like he wanted to intervene, but the crowd's energy was building towards something inevitable. "Very well," he said reluctantly. "But I want medical personnel standing by, and if I see anything unsafe, we stop immediately." Maya nodded and moved to lane 7, the same lane where her dreams had died less than 24 hours earlier. She loaded her magazine with practiced efficiency, her movements calm and deliberate despite the dozens of eyes watching her every motion. The familiar weight of the Glock felt different now, not like a foreign object, but like a natural extension of her will. "Load and make ready," Rodriguez commanded, his voice tight with anticipation. Maya chambered a round and holstered the weapon, then tied the bandana around her eyes. The world disappeared into perfect darkness, and immediately her other senses exploded to life. She could hear the subtle shift of fabric as people leaned forward, smell the gun oil and cleaning solvent that permeated the range, feel the exact distance to the target through some sense she couldn't name. "You have 2 minutes for 25 rounds, Rodriguez announced. "Begin firing when ready." Maya drew her weapon and settled into her stance, but this time everything felt different. Her breathing slowed to a meditative rhythm, her heartbeat steadied, and the gun seemed to align itself without conscious effort. The first shot broke cleanly, the recoil flowing through her body like water. The range fell silent except for the rhythmic crack of gunfire as Maya worked through the qualification course. Each shot felt perfect, each trigger pull a meditation on precision and control. She could sense the target as clearly as if it were glowing, could feel each bullet finding its mark with supernatural accuracy. When the last shot echoed through the range, the silence that followed was deafening. Maya holstered her weapon and removed the blindfold, blinking in the sudden brightness. The faces around her showed a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something approaching awe. Rodriguez pressed the button to bring the target forward, his hands visibly shaking. As the paper drew closer, gasps rippled through the crowd. The target looked like it had been attacked by a precision instrument, 25 holes clustered in a group no larger than a playing card, all within the highest scoring zones. Captain Morrison stepped forward and examined the target closely, his experienced eye taking in every detail. "Score?" he asked quietly. Rodriguez's voice was barely a whisper. "Perfect. 300 out of 300. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some cadets cheered, others stood in stunned silence, and a few pulled out their phones to capture images of the impossible target. Jessica Martinez pushed through the crowd, her eyes wide with amazement. "Maya, how did you? I mean, that was incredible." But Maya's attention was focused on Rodriguez, who stood frozen beside the target, his face a mask of confusion and something that might have been fear. When he finally looked up, his eyes met hers across the range. "I don't understand," he said, his voice carrying despite the noise around them. "How is this possible?" Maya walked over to him, her movements calm and confident. "You were right about one thing," she said quietly. "Some people just don't have what it takes, but you were wrong about which people." She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the range. "For 12 weeks I tried to shoot the way you taught me. I tried to see the target, align the sights, focus on the front sight post. But that's not how I see. That's not how I aim. I had to find my own way." Captain Morrison stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "Chen, what you've demonstrated here is unprecedented. But I have to ask, can you replicate this consistently? Police work isn't about trick shots. It's about reliable performance under stress." Maya smiled, and for the first time in months it felt completely natural. "Sir, I'd be happy to demonstrate that this isn't a trick. It's just who I am." She gestured toward the range. "Anyone who wants to see more is welcome to stay. But I think we all know that my withdrawal meeting just became a graduation ceremony." Rodriguez stared at the shredded target in his hands, then at Maya, then back at the target. His entire worldview had been shattered in the space of 2 minutes, and he was struggling to process what he'd witnessed. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I was completely wrong about you." Maya nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "We were both wrong, Instructor Rodriguez. I thought I had to be like everyone else to succeed, but sometimes the best way forward is the one nobody else can see." As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and disbelief, Maya stood alone at lane 7, looking downrange at the empty target holder. Tomorrow she would begin advanced training. Next month she would graduate from the academy. And someday soon she would pin on her father's badge and serve the city he died protecting. But she would do it her way, in the darkness where her true sight lived, guided by senses that transcended the ordinary and touched something deeper than vision could ever reach. The gun didn't make the officer made the gun work, and Maya Chen had finally learned to make it sing.